Good. We did. I would like to call the Community Finance Committee meeting of March 21st to order.
Mr. Kowski,
Here.
Mr. Davis, Dr. Lorenzo, Ms. Guerrero,
Here.
Mr. Henry, Mr. Arnott,
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Mr. Miller,
Here.
Mr. Miller.
Here.
Dr. O'Neill. Here. Dr. Sanders.
Here.
Mr. Miller.
Here.
Thank you. Thank you again. This is for another quick turnaround on the minutes. Does anyone have any questions or concerns about the minutes from our meeting on March 13th? If not, I have a motion. Second. All in favor? Any opposed? Thank you. At this point in the meeting, we have an opportunity for public comments. As with past practice, we would like to take comments in 3 minutes. I'm with my timekeeper.
Before we start, I would like to acknowledge Mr. Davis for leading these days. We have 3 public comments in person and 1 via Zoom. Our first speaker tonight is Mr. Peter Ryan.
Hi, good evening. Peter Ryan from Oak Park. Thank you for your efforts so far evaluating funding options for Imagine Project 2. We have all the data necessary to forward at least 3 funding scenarios to the board for final vetting and ultimately a decision on how to proceed. To allow elected leaders time for evaluation and discussion, I expect we can have this committee needs to complete this work tonight and let the board take it from here. More specifically, scenarios 3, 4, and 5 presented to the board last week. We can move forward for full consideration. The reasons that are really unfortunate discussion about Project 2 have been far too polarized and vitriolic. In that vein, it is important for you to proceed by giving the board several options to evaluate versus a single agenda-driven recommendation. In fact, your advisory role is your responsibility to give the board multiple reasonable choices to consider. I don't believe anybody else is the voice of our community. In the circles I travel, there are many who agree we do not need a referendum fund project. But we have talked and delayed enough. Just do it. I wholeheartedly agree. This is not about denying voters a choice. Rather, it emphasizes an entirely reasonable funding model and the urgency of addressing long overdue student and facility needs. This committee does not feel misheard these kinds of voices much. The board certainly has, from a far broader contingent of people and the community who repeatedly, almost accept voice objections to Project 2, not ever centering students in their reasoning. If you'd like to hear the voices of students themselves, consider the over 665 kids who were interviewed during the Imagine process itself. These are the voices that shape the plans we're discussing today. If you're considering the hard costs of funding Project 2 would serve the community well, so you also think about the harm less quantitative, the very real costs of going to the referendum. The cost of another year of polarizing newspaper articles, lawyer requests, emails to the board and administration, social media arguments, yard size, etc. Cost and time and resources to the board and administration instead be diverting their energies to other very important issues. The effects of the 2016 referendum are still rippling through our communities 7 years later. Most important of all, what is the ultimate cost to the students and staff who might use yet another year of access to Project 2 facilities? We have the resources to avoid all of that. We need to use them. What the data objectively show from the March 13 presentation is that scenarios 1 and 2 involve too much overall cost in order for the consideration. Right? It's right on. Scenarios 3, 4, and 5 are the most viable and should be forwarded to the board for final consideration. The rest of the page can take private place to democratically elected board.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you, Mr. Ryan. Our next speaker is Monica Sheehan. Thank you. Good evening, I'm Monica Sheehan. First, my comments, I want to highlight the absurdity of the board's recent change order, now insisting that you, the CFC, only provide pros and cons, no fact-based opinion commonly known as a recommendation regarding project use funding. The board's pivot came after a majority of the CFC stated the following at a recent meeting and in adherence to best practices, that project two should go to referendum. Debt certificates should not be used to fund long-term capital projects, and donations should only be included in a financing plan when the check is cashed. Underscoring the absurdity of the board's pivot is the fact that it wants the CFC to recommend a fund balance range, but no recommendation on project two's funding. Why one recommendation but not the other? The board's manipulation of the CFC, as well as the administration, and board's pretzel-like maneuvers to avoid a referendum are crystal clear. That's what scenario 4 is all about. It's an insidious plan to bypass voters on a controversial and expensive project. It's an even more devious funding plan than the one the board approved in 2015, when it attempted to bypass voters on a $37.5 million pool. Scenario 4's debt certificates would provide voters with no petition process for the funding on the ballot. The administration continues to misleadingly promote that scenario 4 will cost taxpayers $0, when the actual cost will be about $199 a year, a higher than necessary operating levy that would be compounded in subsequent levies. Scenario 2, which retains taxpayers' rights to vote on this funding, would cost also $199 a year, and its borrowing costs are less than scenario 4's. Scenario 2 is the transparent and democratic plan to fund project 2. Last week, the administration falsely stated that districts 203 and 113 use debt certificates to fund recent projects. A search of their websites proves otherwise. D200 staff are trying to justify using debt certificates to fund project 2 when there is no justification for doing so. Coincidentally, D200 bond consultant Elizabeth Hennessy is also the bond consultant to D203. She attended last week's CFC meeting and did not correct the false information promoted by the administration. Her name is on the D203 funding presentation, and she presented it at board meetings. At a minimum, taxpayers have the right to expect that this administration and its consultants act ethically in all matters. That is not the case with the Project 2 funding discussion. The administration's chart on comparable districts is disingenuous, attempting to understate their use of referendums and overstate their use of other borrowing tools to fund major capital projects. The chart only lists referendums that voters approved and disingenuously limits the timeframe to 2012. Referendums are major, generational, or longer funding requests of voters. I researched the listed districts and updated the chart with referendum information and have copies for you. Referendums are the number one way that these districts and others fund major capital projects. They largely use other borrowing tools for smaller projects, money safety needs, and a refund outstanding debt. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Thank you. Our next speaker, Mr. Kevin Potter.
Yes, I have a detailed report where I gave everybody a hard copy. I emailed that to you also. So I'll summarize that in my 3 minutes.
Thank you.
I've already sent you an analysis of critique of which was not the product outline. Let me summarize those. He has conceptual flaws about what basis on which to measure cost. He compares the false straw men and assumes continuation of bad practices. Moving on, debt certificates have many faults, one of which is they leave an excess levy overhang when paid off. Unlike a bond issue where attacking the authority expires. Rather than commit future boards and voters for 20 years, you will build in a permanent increase in the operating levy base unless taxes are later deliberately lowered. He ignores the excess operating levy used to fund those and that need not otherwise be taxed. These do not have a zero cost. Instead, they have a $3.5 million per year cost. As for running down existing cash, that also does not have a zero cost. There is the opportunity cost of not returning the overtaxed money, which was taxed for operations, not capital. I will lay out a practical way to do that, a return, and help restore some goodwill and trust with the district that it is lost, helping you with your referendum in the process. Using common sense and economic intuition, these scenarios all cost roughly the same. It is a matter of who pays what and when. Examine my stories about how District 97 has been misled by an investment banker in the past. Elizabeth Hennessy has not enlightened you on those numbers. She has obscured what is going on. Candidates are quoting her numbers, and voters are relying upon them. You have a duty to correct the record. As to comparing to other districts, many of those are advised by Hennessy. The fact that they do this or that does not mean that it is the best practice. Most were seeking to avoid having their citizens vote on the projects in their communities. Finally, the up cost due to delay argument is a red herring and likely crap. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Picard. Via Zoom, we have Mr. Marty Bernstein.
Good evening. This is Marty Bernstein. I spoke at the last CFC meeting a couple of weeks ago, and I offered my thoughts on reprioritizing projects 2 through 5. After I spoke, Ms. Kamenetz wanted to clarify a few things. So she came up, she talked about funding. That's fine. I understand you can't fund everything all at once. But then she explained how the imagined plan was like a puzzle where each particular project was dependent on the previous one for being able to complete the project. Yeah, 1 second. So what I wanted to ask is, I was looking at the document from November 5th, 2018, when the Imagine Workgroup Facilities Master Plan was presented to the board for acceptance. And on the first link of agenda item 7, there's a paragraph that reads as follows. Acceptance of the plan means the board accepts the recommended facilities master plan, which is different from approving the plan. By accepting the long-term facilities master plan, the board is accepting the identified facility needs and is not locked into a financial commitment. Once accepted, the facilities master plan becomes the board's. At that point, the Board of Education has the latitude to then decide what portion of the plan to implement and when, along with how to fund that portion. Well, that doesn't sound to me like the project was presented as a 5-piece puzzle that all had to be done in order. It sounds to me like that says just exactly the opposite, that the board can decide what to do and when and in what order. So my question is, which is it? Does it all have to be done in order, or does the board have the latitude to figure out what to do when? It's very confusing to me, and I think that if it is indeed the puzzle, that the document, when it was first presented to the board, should have said these things are dependent on each other. I will send an email later to the CFC asking for the answer to that question. Thanks for your time. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bernstein, and that concludes our public notice for tonight.
Our next agenda item, the first discussion item, updated financial projections. This was our ask to the administration at our meeting last week, was to do a financial projection model, 5 years for each of the 5 debt scenarios or funding scenarios that we discussed. Cindy or Brian, are you gonna do a quick one? Oh, I'm sorry. Great. And so the first.
Yeah, just really quick before you go into this, I know that we're going to dive into the discussion, the meat and potatoes of the work. But before we do that, I'm asking Elizabeth to come on up if you could. And I want to go back to something that's on the agenda here, but also was referenced at our last meeting. I want to add additional information and make sure that we have a chance to speak to some information that was in our slide deck last Monday. So if you could pull up on the second agenda, Ed, on the second agenda item, pull up the second attachment, and you have it up right now. Excellent. Oh, it's really sad. Fabulous work. And if you could scroll through to slide 9. Okay. Yes, that is it. We want to speak to information on this slide and in a few of the columns, but specifically, of course, the second to last column there, where it's listing debt certificate and alternate revenue bond issuance amounts. There's some corrected information in there, or at least some additional information, as well as more complete definitions of some of that information in the slide below. And I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth to speak to that was very discussed this. Thank you.
Thank you. So with regard to this slide, we have been more specific of the two types of operating fund debt that school districts can issue. They are both debt certificates and alternate revenue bonds. The only difference between debt certificates and alternate revenue bonds is that alternate revenue bonds have a tax levy attached to them that go onto the tax roll at the time of issuance. And each year, as the operating revenues are available to make the debt service payment, that tax levy is then abated. And the key to this debt practice analysis, however, is not whether the operating fund obligation takes the form of a debt certificate or an alternate revenue bond. It is more important to understand what other districts are doing from a data point of view in terms of using their operating funds to leverage debt. So that's the point of looking at what is the security. Referendum bonds, as we know, have a separate tax levy, a separate bond and interest tax levy that repays the debt. Debt service extension-based bonds also have a separate tax levy that is set forth by the tax limitation law. Debt certificates and alternate bonds are both paid back by operating revenues. So I apologize to the committee for not catching the labeling on debt certificate alternate bonds. It was a group project, and I apologize that that definition wasn't more clear to you. But there certainly was no intent to deceive. What we're trying to look at here as a finance committee is your financing options and what sources of revenue, what tools you have to leverage debt to help you issue your bonds for your project. I would also mention that debt certificates and alternate bonds are both a budgeting exercise. It's not only on the revenue side, and revenues include not only the tax levy, they include state aid, corporate personal property replacement taxes, a multitude of revenues. It's also on the expenditure side. Is there something we can reduce to make room in our budget for the $3.5 million payment that we've used in these actions, in these scenarios? And as we said many times before, these are scenarios for your consideration and education, help you understand what levels of debt other districts have out, how it impacts their debt limit, how it impacts their operating funds. So I'd be happy to answer any questions. Just wanted to clarify this page now.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Can you also speak to, I think we added a sentence there regarding the petition process. That's one of the key differences between alternate bonds and debt certificates.
Yes, because alternate bonds have that backup tax levy, there is a petition period and public hearing process, which is similar to DSET bonds. So that is included. And again, from a finance point of view, we're focusing on the impact on operating budgets. Politically, whether it's petition period, public hearing, referendum, those are political decisions for the education that ultimately make.
Any further questions or comments on that?
No, this is from the rest of the committee, of course. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate that.
And we can take a quick look at the financial projections. So the old projections that we had at the last meeting, didn't align with any specific funding scenario. They did take into account funding projects, not necessarily in any of the ways that matched any of the current scenarios that we're looking at. And they really only went out 4 years. We look at the current year as the base year, so I asked if we could look at a 5-year projection, went out 1 more year, which helps capture some of the tail end of potential projects and funding, and then do a version for each of the scenarios.
Steve, I'll just give a quick intro into the updated 5-year projections here. So,
Just to say, right,
Mr. Amroff, before you begin, I just want to acknowledge you as beginning joining me. You understand?
okay, go ahead. Rob.
Thank you.
okay, so based on the last meeting, we did provide 5 different sets of financial projections, one that aligns with each financing scenario. There was also a request to add, an additional year to the back end of the projections to kind of see where things happen on the tail end of project 2 based on the timing and the schedule of the project in each of those scenarios. So in doing that, we did a complete reevaluation of all the assumptions and everything that get worked into the projections. The major change, as we kind of alluded to at the end of the last meeting, was looking at the interest income and how the markets have changed since our previous update, which was done with last year's budget, so back in August. Since then, interest rates on our money market account alone have gone up to over 2%. So there's a pretty significant increase in what we're seeing in investment income in each of these scenarios. Other than that, a few assumptions changed in minor fashion related to some employee benefits, just based on experience that we've seen on things like retirement benefits such as 403B match and pensions. And then the specific scenarios incorporate the debt service payments, an additional tax levy on the scenarios where referendum and DSEB bonds apply, and then the associated transfers from operating funds to non-operating funds to cover those payments. So that's kind of a quick overview of assumption changes. And then on each of the scenario projections, you'll see highlighted at the bottom of the first page where we end up in terms of operating expenditures or fund balance as the ratio to operating expenditures. And then we have the chart on page 3 of each projection that shows where we align in terms of the fund balance policy as it exists currently.
So one thing that I noticed was that because of some of those changes that Brian just highlighted, fund balance targets here don't necessarily align with the assumption summary that they could give. Fund balance is going to be at a different level every year, and it's kind of a moving target, and we're trying to run debt scenarios and projection scenarios independently, and they don't always align exactly. But you'll notice that like scenario 1 ends up with a higher fund balance in that 5th year versus the others, because that was the one where we were targeting 50% versus 35% in fund balance. Does anyone on the committee have any specific questions, comments about the projections? These are super helpful for me just in trying to compare the impacts with a little more detail than just our solution on the table that we had last week. So thank you for the quick turnaround on those. It's helpful to look at the third page on each with the chart, where you can kind of see where those balances are in our current fund balance range, for 25 to 75%. Absolutely.
On all of them.
Sure.
So. Option one has a different, is kind of a standalone, it has a different fund balance assumption. All the others have a 35%. So is it then fair that as we look at what the ending fund balance is at the end of the year? 27, 28, whatever that last year, comparing them, does that give us a good glimpse of kind of what the longer term impacts are of these different lines? The differences there.
Yes. You know, I think it's both factor of where that balance is and also somewhat the trajectory or the slope if you're looking at it graphically too. Is it coming in for a softer landing or a steeper landing?
Yeah, I mean, with the curves, it's weird.
But they're all fairly similar from a fund balance standpoint. 2 through 5, because we were targeting
If we were,
that same percentage one.
but let me try to add, if we were targeting the same amount, right? The same fund balance target at the end of 26, 27. Is that correct?
It's more so at the end of the project. So at this point, the target would be at the end of 27, 28. Because in 4 of the scenarios, the project is 1 year later, starts 1 year later.
And Elizabeth, I think when you ran some of these numbers, you mentioned putting in an additional 5 million kind of for the year that was formerly off the end of the projections, right, to account for that next year's spending.
Correct.
So, but I mean, okay, so we're saying now 27, 28. I thought when we last met, we said everything was done at 26, 27, and therefore 27, 28 would be the first year after the project. So that's not the case.
'27, '28 would be the first year after the project in funding scenarios. Every funding scenario, 7 scenarios.
Yes.
Brian or Cindy, when we're looking at dollar amounts in the transfer line or in the spend line in the non-operating funds, because that's primary, well, it's not primary this summer because it's gonna be going on year round, right? So what would be the expected completion date?
Expected completion date of the project in.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's 2 scenario.
Yeah.
4 has 1 and the others have.
So just general sense, like the block of time that needs to be moved one way or the other, we're talking about 2 complete school years. And so we're talking about that would begin as soon as we could at the conclusion of 1 school year, during the summer, and would take in the bulk of the last summer as well. Does that make sense? So
Probably
fall.
3 summers and therefore
3 summers, 2 full
fiscal
school years.
years.
Yeah.
The
It'll be over 3 fiscal years, but we have to look at the one scenario, I'm sorry, I had to keep going through this one. But when you look at scenario 4, because that would start in the year of 24, 25. That would end, a year before, something that would be a referendum that would still, could possibly be a year out. So that's why you have to go out for years, so we do 27, 28, or something like that.
Any other questions about any of the specific projections or the projections in general?
I did have a question on the total project cost in slide 14. How is that calculated? Are we taking into consideration any time value of the money, or just, straight interest payments in the year that are made, for example? You can answer.
So total project cost on that slide is consisting of the cost of the construction project itself, plus any interest associated with the debt involved in that financing option.
When that interest is paid out.
Correct. So over the life of the bond issuance or debt issuance.
So scenario 4 is 102 million and the other is 180 million, plus then the interest calculations that were not the detailed calculation sheets. So I think what I'd like to do is talk through each of the scenarios using Tom's rubric that he laid out for us last week. So there's 4 factors that we want to evaluate scenarios off of. One is the impact on the taxpayer. One is the impact on the district from a future borrowing capacity standpoint. Then there's another impact on the district from an operational budgetary standpoint. And then the last one was how does that option compare to policy and go investment practice. We can talk through these 5 scenarios and then any others. Like this. I don't know if it's easier to go through each scenario and hit all 4 pieces of the rubric, or go through one thing like impact on the taxpayer and for all the scenarios. And everybody have a preference on the approach.
Let's go to 3-1.
Each scenario.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
It's going to be more, this will be more scenario we paid.
We can that probably, but it's still that's what I'm looking at in front of me. So I think that that's the best place to sum it. So scenario 1 was the smaller amount of fund balance spend that left the district at 50%. In the rough numbers, it's 60% in the latest projections. And then all of them have this $12.5 million donation assumption. And that is the balance for the referendum, $9.5 million. So the impact on the taxpayer is the far right column on this. It's the $266. The $500,000 home per year. It's gonna be that same amount throughout. Based on the level of that service and the planning assumption. I'll just keep rolling through it unless someone has a specific question or comment. The impact on the district future borrowing then is the 3rd column from the right. That's the percentage of debt available. So this one has the lowest, it's a 65%. That's because it has the greatest amount of borrowing because there's less fund balance spend down. So there's less borrowing capacity available for boards in this scenario as opposed to the others. Yes.
Percentage wise, I mean, I know the number changes every year, with like dollar value associated with 74%. But is it possible to maybe show the dollar value associated with that? Of some sort.
I can do that real quick.
I just think that'd be helpful to see that. Oh, maybe if we have 74% capacity, is that like, I mean, this is not the correct number, but if it's 20 million, you know, like, so it's 15 million, that.
No, but unless my phone calculator doesn't have an update.
I mean, I just did 170 minus what you borrowed. That was the kind of.
Yeah.
That works too. I'm not sure you calculate it.
Subtraction instead of division, so it's 100, you have $110 million of.
We want
So to welcome, I just want to acknowledge Dr. Pierre Winslow for joining the meeting. Good evening.
$110 million.
Yes. We're asking.
Yeah, I just seeing the percentage.
Right, especially because we've had so many conversations about, this is the last project that we need to do. Think about 4, 3, 4, and 5 other things outside of Imagine. And trying to equate it to $1 for future needs. Super helpful. The third piece then was the impact on district operations. That I guess you can look at that 2 ways. You can tell me how you were looking at it, but that some sense that's unbalanced, but more so it's are we committing future operating budgets to spending on the plan? So from that perspective, there's no future operating revenues committed to debt service, and we have a higher operating fund balance than. Both.
Yeah, I mean, it's just some comparative with the different, what it looks like in the district operating. So you said we not a higher fund balance starting and no dollars committed to
No future operating revenue committed.
being used to pay for debt, which in other options they're gonna have to, right? Okay.
So then, I think the hardest one to quantify was your fourth piece. How does it compare to policy and best practice? We talked a lot around policy, but sort of in the end, this last week sort of scaled back the idea of a very specific debt policy. Do you have any elaboration on what you were looking at there?
No, it's just based on what data and what just. Again, I'm gonna. Just anything that says what are we doing factually here versus what our policy and what others are doing instead.
So I don't think our policy is gonna weigh in on any of the differences on any of these, given how kind of plain vanilla it is. So then on the comparative analysis, we saw that most of the districts have done referendums in the past, and so I think this one aligns with those practices of peer districts. Using referendum sort of like projects. What else would let's just on this scenario one.
I guess just 2 thoughts. One, this isn't in the rubric, but there's the time question too, right? Does it add the extra year or does it not add the extra year? I don't know if that's relevant to the decision making, but it seems like it's okay. Maybe that's part of best practice, or that fourth category, just kind of like what are the impacts of that for decision takes longer. Oh, and then what about total? Do we want to look at that total project cost number?
as well? Because
yeah,
this one is the highest total cost. of the
I think that
taxpayers.
factors in also to the impact on the taxpayer, piece. Because the total project cost is ultimately being borne by the taxpayers, So yeah, I agree, I think the total cost is definitely relevant.
No, I mean, that's good. I would just ask your question on time, just to make sure we're clear, because is time factored into the financial aspects? Is what, you know, I mean, there's a financial aspect, which is what we need to hear from here. And then there's the, you know, student, everything else, which is not in the purview here. So I would just say, as long as time has been factored in, I mean, it's been factored in terms of the cost of the project. It's been factored in terms of the interest. So are there any other places that, from a financial standpoint, that time has not been adequately addressed, is what I would want to make sure, right? So that we just are looking at it on an apples to apples basis.
So, it was scenario one. Scenario two then, is very similar, other than the fund balance comes down to a lower level, and therefore the referendum borrowing comes down as well. That means there's a lower increase in the debt tax rate, $199.66. Because you're borrowing less, then there's also more future borrowing capacity available. There's the number.
No, I'm, if you throw in the total project cost, and that's what, the interest plus the project, right?
Right. So. Well, we're borrowing 15 million less, so we have 125 million of debt capacity available. Again, there's no impact to the operating budget. There's no operating debt. One of the things that I guess I've been thinking about a little bit is, you know, this is going to be funded by the community, by the taxpayers, but which members of the community, and you know, in thinking about fund balance versus future borrowing and future taxpayers, and sort of weighing that and spend out the fund balance that has been collected over the years. I think there's value in using both of those streams of funding. The district, starting back with the CFAC, did a lot to address the fund balance. We saw that on one of the charts that, from last week, of how much the fund balance has come down, and you know, past taxpayers certainly contribute to that, and are contributing to this project, and have certainly benefited from this school and overall the years. So I like the idea of balance between past and future funding. I guess if that makes sense. Moving on to scenario three, then this is the one that has a little bit of everything. We've got fund balance. It's got debt certificates, suspension-based bonds. It has a referendum. It has debt certificates. Those could be alternate revenue bonds also, and the donation. So with this one, impact on the taxpayer is lower from an increased debt service rate standpoint. It varies because the D200 and the debt certificates are shorter. So it's $200 in the first 10 years, and then under $192 the last 10 years. for an average of 146. It's between the other two, so let's say it's a roughly 117 million of available debt service, but it's gonna, your debt limit is gonna be available, we're freeing up faster because they have the shorter payment cycle and stuff.
And the interest cost is lower.
Right,
So,
yeah, so yeah, because you're paying up a big chunk of it. Right. Well, you're paying off, of the part borrowed, you're paying off 60% of it in 10 years, and you're paying off a big chunk of it in 5 years. That's what, that leads to lower total costs, that leads to lower tax, on the tax bill as well.
What about the operating? This is
Right, so this one definitely has an impact on the operations. We've got a $3.5 million commitment for 5 years, right? Of the debt certificates. For
when you calculated the percent of debt limit, what, I mean, or the percent in dollars, what did you get? Is that looking?
I just eyeballed it.
Yeah.
Halfway in between scenarios 1 and 2, and so it was like 170.
Yeah.
I didn't try that. So you can see, if you look at the projection scenarios, then there's 3 years of the $3.5 million transfer for the debt certificates that comes out. Fund balance is at 39%. In 2028, you have 2 more years of that are beyond the 5-year projection. Any questions or comments on scenarios, right?
I think of as if you start getting to these, where it's different. It's 3.5. Yeah. Restarting, you playing with the timing or tranches over this part's 5 years, this year's 10 years. If it does want something like, instead of spreading cost out of 20 years, it's good for you. Yeah. 1, 2, 4. It's just spread financing over 20 years and spell that out a little more clearly. Because you're talking about future taxpayers and current taxpayers, so right like that one here, you're saying the next 5 years.
Yeah, so what one year?
These folks are paying off with bulk of the project, and it's years 6 through 10. Those folks are only paying off this part of the project in years 11, 20. This is how much left is going to pay off.
But you're by accelerating that repayment, you're saving on interest costs, but you're also putting more of the repayment on over a shorter period of time.
Yeah.
A group of current.
Yeah.
Taxpayers.
So we didn't. And that's kind of what I was getting at. Once you get to these two, that it's not a straight line. So it impacts what your debt capacity is, changes, right? I mean, as you pay off that first 5 years, it springs back up, right? Or so
We could even chart.
Yeah.
That capacity is
kind of somewhat. This is the payment by the taxpayers changes the year the amount we have. So it's, I think for Craig's comment, it's good is
yeah.
just recognizing it's not like the other three.
And scenario 4 is the non-referendum option.
What about the best practices discussion?
Oh, sorry, yeah. We didn't really talk about that on 2, but it's, so similar to one. So on 3, I guess. Yeah, we're, I mean, we saw how the peer districts use a little bit of everything over time, but in general, the bigger projects are referendum funded, with the exception of the 2 recent ones we talked about last week in the Trier and the kind of part. That are using operating dollars for 20 years. I think these are better in that the operating borrowing is short. And so you're not tying up future boards to the extent that those 2 examples are. Anyone else have thoughts on that with scenario 3? Best practices standpoint. Okay, so then scenario 4, as the non-referendum option, there's no increase in the debt service levy. So from an impact on taxpayer standpoint, that's beneficial. Obviously, the total cost is lower than scenario 1 and 2, where you have all that interest cost. Over 20 years, largely referendum borrowing. It's a similar debt limit available as some of the other ones also. As the one. This is the one where I think it deviates from the best practice compared to what the peers are typically doing. Committing future operating budgets for 20 years, as we talked about in prior meetings.
Well, and the amount is quite high as well, so. Right,
Well, it's 3.5 billion for 20 years.
I mean, the total amount of the debt certificates is 45 million.
Right.
13.6.
But then, just to clarify, on the $0 impact on taxpayers. So we're assuming
Well,
that under this option, there would be, we would be able to find 3.5 million for 20 years out of the existing levy.
it's not a $0 impact on taxpayers, it's a $0 increase in the debt levy.
I understand that, but I wonder if there's a way we could clarify that in some way, because it seems to me that to say it's a $0 impact on taxpayers, I understand it's 0 additional levy from new bonds, but that's still not really accurate, right? So I don't know if there's a way we can quantify or clarify that it's still being paid for by the taxpayers. You see what I'm saying? Like, my question is, if you're either paying the 3.5 million out of the operating budget or not, but I think that I'm saying the levy being the same, we pay that, or we wouldn't pay it, there's no difference in the operating budgets.
Right. Yeah, we could. I'm sure we probably it's roughly $200.
Yeah, 3.5.
Yeah.
What I'm saying. You can do so like that last column on there. The last column says annual average amount of additional debt levy. The column says for all these annual average amount of levies, whether debt or out of operations, 4 to 500,000 homes, we can kind of quantify that. And so it's still 266, 199. And then scenario 3 becomes 399 for years 1 through 5, 200 for 6 through 10, and 93 for 11 through 20. Right? That's the death certificates here are 5 years, right? So if you qualify that way. And then let's see, 4 is 199 for 1 through 20. And then 5 is you just change it instead of you say 1 through 5 is 414. That's 199 to 215. Let's go 14 for 1 through 5. That's like a different column. Yeah, that's not saying that's just the way they're like saying it. So I think that helps alleviate your question.
Yes.
The way of showing it. It's not necessarily saying an additional levy, it's just showing this is the cost of the project set aside for financing over the years.
And
Whatever piece of financing it is.
And you said this in the past too, every year is still a levy decision by a future board. So
Yeah.
we're not trying to change up any levy philosophy or anything, but just quantifying what we're spending. Future budgets.
That's if you over here.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's either in the levy or it's in the district's, you know, it will accumulate or you make a decision. So I think as long as you're looking at it, you're presenting it in an apples to apples basis. That's the intent, right?
Yeah.
So that's what would be beneficial.
I think I was changing the wording on it. So it doesn't sound like it. That's why I was changing that heading on that last column there to whether it's out of an additional debt levy or it's built into an operating question. Set aside. Then also, I think that helps alleviate your question. I think, of showing the numbers in totality.
You jumped in, let's say for 4 or 5, sorry. So do we have anything else on 4? I think it's a little steep interest cost wise, but that's fine.
So maybe you could quantify that in terms of actual.
Sorry. A little steep interest wise, 10 million over scenarios 3 and 5. Maybe 10 million divided by households in the course of part of the budget, 372 houses. Yeah, 1, 2, and 4 in relation to 3 and 5, because all of the debt is over 20 years. It spreads it out from the taxpayer's perspective, but to get that benefit of spreading it out, there's a cost.
I don't understand your number for a second. You said, what was the number you said? 3 something,
372.
372. So
And what does that represent?
10 million divided by 26,833 households. Part of it.
So I'm just looking, so I'm just trying to understand this. So if I look at scenario 2, there's debt there that is let it out for 20 years. The average cost to the taxpayers in the model we have is $199. Scenario 4, 25.9. So I mean, quite similar, also for 20 years. It would seem to me that the parallel should be, and I don't know exactly where it falls, and I know interest rates are, slightly different for the different types of debt, but it doesn't seem that that would go up $173 from what we see in scenario 2, just purely intuitively. So. Yes.
I think Cal is just saying if there's an extra 10 million that's spent on debt service over time, on interest over time, then if you calculate that as a one-time payment from every household, It's like, it's not an annual,
Right.
the numbers up here are annual, so you're saying just a one-time extra cost of $300.
I sounds.
Yeah, but that's.
I do have a question, just to kind of clarify, so. This is more how we operate now, so the 3.5 we talk about from our operating budget, right?
Yes.
So as we have for the past, say, several years, as we have $3.5 million allocated to this kind of debt service, or no?
For the future years.
No, so for the best thing with this back to the data, so what we've done in the past, so the past 1, 2, 3, 4 years, I would just look at it. We had $3.5 million put allocated to debt service. Or was that just an extra, or that's something we take with in the future?
That would then, there's people that that would be allocated for next year, or it was also fund on the 10-year maintenance.
So we've had, I guess the question is, have we had that for the past several, I guess, fiscal years?
Well, you've been
Yeah,
spending,
So
know
that's
what page.
Because the best way to look at it, in my opinion, so instead of us trying to guess out from the future, what was available in the past from that data? Instead of hypotheticals, just look at what we actually have. Right?
You get it from the sense that your fund balances are above the maximum in your range. But you've been deficit spending and your balances are coming down, so it depends on how you look at it. You have the money in the balances where you could do that.
But it's not coming from the fund balance, so that 3.5 is coming from, not from fund balance, it's coming from operating budget we have annually that we had before.
It's coming from the fund, it's actually coming from the fund balance, because we have to use it all when we're looking at it. So that's how, when the way this was split out is you have the operating and then you have the non-operating. So if we have the non-operating back into it, then we may have some revenue going forward, or we're going to be doing, a little bit of that stuff.
3.5 million to reference.
Yeah.
It's coming from the fund balance.
It's going to come from the fund balance, bringing us starting to us back down.
So if we have that same scenario going for the next several years,
Mhm.
will be the same thing. I think what's kind of confusing is, say 3.5 million is coming from the levies, it's coming from fund balance, and I need that to actually make sure we're talking the same language. And so what I'm hearing is that's coming from the operating budget from the fund balance, not from the levy we take every year, or do not take every year.
Yeah, because we really haven't,
It's
yeah, it's a, yeah, because we haven't really been taking the levy every year.
Right. So let's take, we can look at, as we're looking at these figures, especially last album. That are involved, extra for household payment. Everything else, but if it's not, and it's part of the budget, then it's not actually extra for anybody, so it's for these years.
Some of it is done blocking from, yeah.
So to be clear, what we're talking about is, I mean, Cal's analysis is, guess, slightly skewed, Bill Pascal, because we're looking at $10 million for over X amount of years by household. That's not really correct. If we're looking at, we have it. This we spent from the fund balance from previous years of taxation is not really that dollar amount per.
Yeah, that wouldn't be the case going forward, though. So I think this is where we're looking backward and looking forward.
Or still spending that fund balance. All right, that's what people find.
Well, but we're doing that right off the bat by using a certain amount of fund balance as part of the funding. So once that's gone, fund balance is in your target range, and you're not spending that anymore. It's future levies.
So
3.5
million. You have to levy that amount.
Yeah.
Going forward, yeah. Going back, but we were asking, so that's going forward. That's the one.
Yeah.
Within that range.
I think the other piece I want to add in there is that we talked earlier about balance of this from expenditure versus revenues. So there is a yearly decision that the district board, whatever, would have to make about what happens to our yearly expenditures, our operating cash in a way to ensure that 3.5 is manageable, right? It is able to be done, and so that could affect, and certainly over the long haul would have an effect on the yearly level, certainly. But I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know that it's a direct linear relationship, correct? to the year. And I'll make some.
Yeah, I wouldn't correlate it to the levy, I would correlate it to that year's revenue.
Right.
Like Elizabeth said, you know, you're talking about levy, you're talking about state aid, you're talking about supervisorship, all of those pieces. Lead to either a surplus of revenues or a deficit that's spending out of fund balance and that is available or not for this.
So can I think we're kind of sort through this. You know, which is the impact of the on the district. So what? You haven't finished number 5 yet, right?
Right. So number 5.
Okay, because what I'd like to see is for dialogue is number 2 versus number 4. Okay, just to get crystal clarity on how they're different. Okay, because when I look at them, you're borrowing $45 million in both cases, right?
Rounded. Yep.
Rounded. For 20 years. Your net debt, you know, how much of your debt you're using is the same. What your interest costs are is the same. So, you know, they're as close in terms of a number, but they're fundamentally very different. Yep. And so what is that difference?
The borrowing choice has a very different impact on future boards and operating decisions. The impact really on the taxpayers, once we take into account, you know, Greg's revised way of looking at it, is basically the same. It's either a $200 increase from a referendum to the bond side, or it's a $200 increase in future levies that you might not have needed otherwise to pay for the district.
It's also just a view from the best practices side, right? Number 4 is the one that probably has the worst, rating on the best practices side. Whereas number 2 is higher. So looking at it from that perspective, if what we're looking at is best practices, right, then number 2 is one of the components.
We're seeing best practices, but what is that based? You know, what you've seen districts, I understand different areas, not just here. Is best practices of local area, national, regional, financial best practices, because I think we got to, we're saying best practices, like what does that actually mean?
Yeah. Actually, so Patrick, just a real quick question. So along those lines, right? So are you referring just like how it falls within the current districts? So, yeah. So that's.
So my question is that the best practice financial?
I tried to find some national organization best practices the other day and wasn't able to get any detail, anything beyond, you fund long-term capital projects with long-term borrowing, but not like into the details of specific, types of borrowing that are available. Should we move on to number 5 then? Okay, so number 5 is similar to scenario 3, but took into account some of our recommendations, potentially limiting DSEP borrowing. So it shifts a little more of the payment up front. Get more DSEP by maxing it out in the first 5 years, and then there's 5 more years at a lower level. The debt certificate stays the same. The referendum amount can come down a little bit, just to be doing more of the DSEP. The debt limit is similar to the others in the 7% range, so 117 million available. I'm not sure you calculate the numbers, scenario 5, factor in
Or
Not very low.
one year, 1 through 5, 414. Years 6 through 10, it's the 210 or the 215, let's say, then years 11 through 20, that's 61.
Oh. So it's just in the first 5 years, the number change.
Yes, that 15.6 was 5 years.
Um. So the total cost is the lowest, again, because the salary debt service is the lowest interest cost and lowest total cost. But the impact on taxpayers is high in the early years. And it's right, we're in the same ballpark for that with the standpoint. This has $3.5 million impact on operating budget just for 5 years, so the impact on operations is less than. No, I'm sorry, it's the same. So you have 3, but it's less than the standard. And from the policy best practice standpoint, it's basically similar structure to number 3. The only difference being that it's more just the flexibility.
But these numbers reflect we can borrow everything at once. It's not showing staggered variation of that.
It's all of our
Probably would.
postal books.
But we would not borrow the full amount to use. So these, I guess this real estate argument we're talking about, it makes sense that say borrow all $5 million staff all the tax rate per year. But we're actually not doing it. We probably borrowing something in chunks as we go along. So what should we do first, and then second, and down? That's more of a fairly dramatic. I know it's more granular, but if you want to do a true comparison, I mean, I'm not over it, but
I don't think that would be a clear way of looking at it. I think that has a whole other layer of permutations that just on the water. So I think those are decisions that you'll make when you're in those positions on when we do first, how much we borrow. It's all based on what our interest rate's going to be at that time.
also,
and
so there's a
things
question
like that.
So this, say we do that first, it's 50 pieces, right? That's year 1. How much is that? That you said number, what was that number? That's right. 3.5 million a year. 3.5 million, but she doesn't know, yeah. So what is that in tax rate? That says that's 199. So I think we don't have to do that, but that's how I'm looking at that. So it's not all at once that you bring back. I think we're going to flush it out, at least keep that in mind, and look at it. Listen, for the taxpayer, it's not all that you pay. It's going to vary throughout each year.
So that's a very valid point, and because you've got a number of different funding streams, you'll have the flexibility to decide which makes the most financial sense to use first. And the timing of the donation comes into play. You may spend fund balance down first because it's not advantageous to borrow, or you might want to borrow and lock in rates and spend fund balance at the end. But those are going to be decisions that you would make along the way. Any other questions on scenario 5? Do you feel like we utilize your rubric as intended?
Yeah, I am still kind of, in terms of what the cost is of the district, it's great that it's for future boards to decide what's the dollar value. And I know you came up with an alternate way of kind of looking at that, so, here's what that is.
And look beyond the receiving, we can use this column on there and we have our column, other column there to alleviate Kathleen's question. It's just, it's like different ways of just showing data and the numbers.
Yeah.
Maybe. So you can see them in all the pieces. For you. Because then when Keyrack was asking about like, well, what's that look like? What is distributors payback? What does that look like? How do we describe that? So I don't know. I can't quantify that in a chart. I can kind of like show you. I can show revenues on a chart and expenses on a chart. Can't. That's purely hypothetical. I don't, as Elizabeth said, you can change 2 years from now. You can, you maybe decide you cut $5 million expensive, you cut $5 million expensive, and you can lower your revenue. I can't make those into a model. Sorry.
Are there other scenarios that we want to analyze, something in between these or an alternative? Reducing taxes and borrowing it all. What's it look like? Elizabeth was kind enough to run those numbers for me today when I emailed her late last night. So we ran a scenario of borrowing. Is it 95.5 million? Yeah, so that this would be Mr. Bard's sort of suggestion of give back all of that fund balance from previous taxpayers and then borrow the entire cost of the project, excluding this estimate from the foundation of 12.5 million. So I don't have this on a slide. I mean, I don't think. But
She has to finish this, who's asked to finish the slide.
yeah, okay. Borrowing with the 95.5 million would take the debt limit down to, or debt limit available to 43.8% by my rough calculations. Obviously, it's got a much higher interest cost. The number was estimated at 54 million, which would bring the total project cost to 162 million. And then it would be about a $426 a year impact on the $500,000 home. So this is kind of back to the conversation I was having about which taxpayers pay for things. Yeah, I feel like boards over the last 10 years have done a lot to try to get dollars back to the previous taxpayers that were overtaxed in the tenure before that. And I feel like we're at a point where the dollars that we have should be used on the building and keep the interest costs down. And have a share of the cost between the past, present, and future taxpayers. I'd love to hear anybody else's thoughts on that.
Let's throw it on there. Just throw it on there. I'm not gonna say no. I mean, that's their decision to make. It's something they just say by willing.
I mean, the criteria of impact on the taxpayer is obviously much higher. The impact on the district from a future borrowing standpoint, it handcuffs you to a great degree of future projects as well. It's great that it doesn't impact the operating budget. from a best practices standpoint, I guess we could run a visual projection on what it would look like to. Well, I guess it's really. The finances in general, the same as it does in these first steps. What do we feel like our next steps are? Is there anything else that we want to know that we need to have modeled? Or are we at a place where we can summarize things as a rubric? And then narrow down our options, pass on to the board.
Yeah, let's do it.
Scenarios. How many scenarios would be a six now? I think 2 or 3 is reasonable.
I vote on the easy one. I think we can get rid of one.
Everybody's comfortable bringing balances down lower than that.
We probably just do like first. Working means you just do like 2, 4, and then 3 and 5, you can kind of combine into one.
Yeah.
The base, 3 and 5 are basically pretty the same thing, it's just different amounts in the different buckets. Or, I mean, that's basically what they're moving.
I mean,
Moving more to 5-year or more to 10-year.
I like 5, that was sort of my idea, but instead of but we aren't recommending that kind of policy, but I think either one is representing a little bit as a concept. Yeah.
The interest costs are lower on 5.
True.
About 6.
We don't have the notes. This is what you would do if you refunded it all and paid out. If you send notation. Not a scenario yet, just because you know here.
So if we were to recap 2, 4, and iteration of 3 or 5. Option 2, pros, it preserves the most future borrowing, and is the lowest cost to taxpayers. The 4,
And no impact on the operation.
another thing.
That is typical. It's a strong rating in the best practices category.
4 is basically the same spot from a cost to taxpayer standpoint. It's a little total cost is lower because you're starting your earlier interest cost is basically the same. It does impact operations in for 20 years, so that's a big on that one. And it's not really in line with our peers' practices. I used to consider best practices. And then the 3 or 5 was a little bit of everything, whichever way we go. Because we don't have a calculated average payment. Down spend, but it's an accelerated pay down, so it's a lower cost, but it's a higher impact on the taxpayers in the early years. It has a minimal impact on the operating funds, and it's only 5,000. It's complex to explain all the different pieces.
Which one is it 3 or 5?
Yeah, I think we can treat them similar. The real difference is just how structured it is, how much they're.
So which $20 in this bucket?
35 kind of gives us a range of how we can do it. If we wanted to use 35, we wanted to be at everything, say for the scenario 5, if we wanted to get 130, we could kind of do better. And see how scenario 3 is 150. Or make them focus and see how much it is. It's like they're so close, just like Brody said. I guess if we're looking to differentiate between the two, 5 is a little better from the impact on the district because it gives them a little more flexibility in future environments. With the piece of structure. So I guess if we're just picking one and go with 5. How would you like this to come to the board? Yeah.
No, I think it would be beneficial if you or someone came to present and pardon?
That's what we discussed before. Questions.
Yeah, and present kind of the findings and the deliberation of what the differences are of the recommended of the options that you're bringing forth. Information on options that were not brought forth. This is kind of what you're not going to say. I think that would be good. I mean, you're working it into a table. It's pretty good. So I think that would cover it.
I think now about the dates, it's too early for us to go to that part of the conversation.
No.
So I think we're happy to have you come Thursday night, 2 days. I'm just kidding. If we're talking about
the agenda already out.
it is, it definitely is. The first reason the committee meeting in April, I suppose, which is the 13th. You organize yourself.
Is it on our agenda? We have a lot of discussion about projects and fund discussion, right? So I decide that order.
I mean, it is. There is an agenda item on there. We don't have any, obviously, the documents, right? But as long as the agenda item is on there, we're good as far as.
So can we not use that time for talk about?
I mean, I was actually planning to cheat on that. That's a very quick turnaround.
We say no to that.
We didn't say no yet.
I believe I'm available Thursday. I will not be available.
We're going to answer our questions.
Yeah, I mean the difference.
I don't feel like we have any additional calculations. It's just summarizing.
Yeah, we asked the question, right? Just. They didn't come 2 days.
Well, I think we have a question that has been answered. So that's fair.
We were going to give an update of where we are, but if the committee feels it has information that it can share with the board, all the power to it.
We're not far on this way, right?
No,
Okay, but that was my comment. Question before about any breakdown. That's something we should think about.
Well, especially if it's around like $3.5 million a year in interest.
design and planning is only 5 to 9% of the project. And then everything after that, construction starts. And one of the boys now, that's the key. 2, 4, 5.
So I'll put together a summary and send it to everybody. Yes.
Is there,
Yours.
is there a, you flying solo on this one, Steve, or is somebody?
I would love to have as many people that are available at short notice to join me.
That was my way to solicit the rest of the committee and see if anybody else wants to sit next to you for more support.
I think you can do the job.
Why we elected. If only we had such illustrious titles. Chairman, Chair and co-chair.
Chair.
Yes, I was checking. What's happening? You can shoot bring the name
Yeah, we'll be in open session at 7:30.
Oh, okay, perfect. Good.
All right, thank
I'm just
you.
busy.
Well, no, it's a regular meeting, so there's a lot of it, so.
We're number 11.
Without my second question.
I can pull it up.
So the modified.
Yeah, we can move it up, but it's a discussion, yeah, we can move the discussion items up.
Comments, so that's actually on the.
Probably not to discuss here. Well,
I don't know.
I don't know exactly where you're going, I suppose.
Yeah, that's like. I don't mean to slap by. Jenny is asking because it's.
All right, let's take it. Yeah, we'll make it work. We'll try to move you.
It's.
All right.
You want a prime time slot, is that what you're asking?
It's not very long agenda, right?
Yeah, yeah, this one is should not be, yeah, I know,
Okay,
Okay.
Are we going to prioritize these or just submit all three?
I think I'm gonna summarize our conversation on all three, where they, kind of hit across the rubric, and that's what we're presenting. And I think as Tom had said earlier, then the board gets decided, what gets decided, but we're just talking about the financial pieces of the board. So, sound good? Any last thoughts, comments? Otherwise, a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Ken. All in favor?
All right.
Aye.
Aye.